Greetings. Peace be with you. I have a special treat for you tonight. Those of you who are regular viewers of this show know that my usual format is to just do a solo lecture. It's usually just me and my cards and you, the viewing audience. Tonight, I'm going to try something a bit different. I'm going to conduct an interview, a very special interview. My guest tonight, Dr. Robert Eisenman, is an acknowledged Dead Sea Scroll expert of the highest caliber. In fact, in the 1990s, when you mentioned the Dead Sea Scrolls, the name that comes to mind is Dr. Robert Eisenman, and that's because it was in the 1990s that Dr. Eisenman was the point man in the release of many Dead Sea Scrolls that had never before been released to the public. Dr. Eisenman is a high caliber scholar. He is the head of the Institute for Judeo-Christian Origins at Cal State Long Beach. He is the author of several books on the Dead Sea Scrolls and early Christian origins. Dr. Eisenman is not a representative of my church, nor is he here representing any religious institution. It's precisely because Dr. Eisenman is such a free agent that he's able to, without any constraints, simply search out the truth and release that truth to you, the public, as he has been doing in his books, which we'll get into tonight. I'm very proud to have as my guest Dr. Robert Eisenman. Professor Eisenman, for the benefit of our viewers, let's begin with a bit of biographical information. You know, where you were born, what schools you went to, what degrees you took, and what positions you've held in the academic world.
Well, actually, I'm pretty much an East Coast person. I come from, of all places, New Jersey. I was born and brought up there. I went to local schools there, local high schools, and I hope your audience won't mind, but I actually went to Ivy League schools. I first went to Cornell University, and after that I traveled abroad a lot. I was teaching in schools in England. I went as far as India. I worked in kibbutzim in Israel, taught school in Italy, in Iran, and in India. And then finally I came back and did a master's in Hebrew and Near East Studies at New York University. From there I went on to do a doctorate at Columbia University in Middle East languages, and that encompassed a lot of work in early Jewish studies in Palestine, early Christian studies, but also combined that with a lot of work in Islamic studies. And so that was the field that I got into. And then I went back to the Middle East and lived in Jerusalem for 4 or 5 more years, taught at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, taught at the University of Tel Aviv, and then finally came back here to the California State University system, where I've been teaching in at Long Beach State since the early 70s. And it was at Long Beach State that actually I got interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the way I got interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls was because my students were interested in things like that. And those of you who know what State University system is, the professors have to respond to student interest. I mean, your classes go according to whether students are interested or not. And when I saw where the things that electrified and basically turned students on, because we wanted to do interesting things in our department, that's the kind of thing that I got into. And then it was through these courses that I saw the relationship of the scrolls to early Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Eisenman, a lot of your work is related to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Many of our viewers are familiar with that term, but little else. Many of them don't even know what country the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in. So for the benefit of the uninitiated amongst our viewers, why don't you tell the basic story, give the basic outline on where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, who discovered them, the basic Dead Sea Scroll story.
Well, there's no real agreement on the basic Dead Sea Scrolls story. It's a long story, but to try to make it as short as possible, the idea was that the scrolls were discovered around 1947, 1948 in caves along the Dead Sea. Therefore, they're called Dead Sea Scrolls. but the literature represented that actually unfolded over the next 5 or 10 years, because the discoveries, a lot of people don't realize, continued for 7 or 8, 9 more years, and all the scrolls weren't really found, the ones that we know. There may be ones that we don't know about, but the ones that we know weren't really found until the mid-50s. But in any case, the first ones were discovered, and a lot of people figured or thought or saw in that some apocalyptic significance, because they were discovered right in the middle of the Arab-Israeli arguments, dispute, and war that finally broke out in the end of 47, beginning of 48. It was at that time that the Bedouin were finding these scrolls in caves and bringing them up to Jerusalem.
And who were the Bedouin?
Well, that's it. The Bedouin, the story goes, and it's not completely clear if that is really true or not. Some say these tribes, Bedouin along the Dead Sea in the Judean wilderness, had found things earlier, but the story only came to the public at this time. But whether that's true so or not, the story that's officially told is that there was a shepherd who was tending sheep along the Dead Sea. In fact, if you know, this was not a boy, it's supposed to be a shepherd boy, this was actually a grown man, and he wasn't simply a shepherd, he was, but he was also a known treasure hunter, so he was looking for things, and basically found the jackpot. What happened was when in his spare time, he would constantly, while he was tending his flocks, look for things, and he was always throwing stones inside of caves and things, and at one particular time, he threw a stone inside of a cave, and instead of hearing clatter, 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 he heard kaplunk, 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 meaning there was broken pottery. And when he crawled in, sure enough, there were 10 or 12 scroll jars, some broken, some completely preserved, in which there were rolled scroll materials, and this is what's known as Cave 1.
And the other discoveries that you alluded to that went on for a number of years, on into the 1950s, there were other caves that were discovered? And
right. Now this is where the story gets complicated, because this Bedouin boy brought the materials up to Bethlehem, which is the closest city on the plain above where the Dead Sea Scroll goes down below sea, where the Dead Sea goes down below sea level. If you climb up to the plain above, it's the Bethlehem plain. So he goes to Bethlehem to a merchant called Kando. This merchant takes the scrolls to Jerusalem to his metropolitan. He turns out to be a Syriac Christian of some kind. And this Syriac metropolitan immediately recognized that he had something very interesting here. In the meantime, some problems occurred between the representatives of the Bedouin shepherd boys and the Christian prelates in Jerusalem, so maybe they were hawking them, but some of them went over to